Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you're back in whatever state you are. So it's all welcome. I thought I'd take a minute just to recap a few highlights from last week's discussion. So Professor Brugman comes up with a few models to think about why calamity might happen and possible biblical reactions to that calamity. And so we talked about one particular model being that we're being punished, sort of this transactional for breaking a commandment. Now, this can be considered quite archaic and brutal. Another is that God is doing this thing, this calamity, to show power, but towards a specific end. So it's towards a specific end. And in this, his thinking is this is not, the reason behind it, and it's not quite visible now. So we're in this ambiguous place where pandemic, calamity is happening, but it's not quite visible. And the third way of considering it from Professor Brueggemann's point of view is that God is working in ways we may never know. We may never know the underpinnings to all of this. And this is where faith is really required. This is where faith is really required to take that leap of faith, to feel as if it's in God's hands. So those were sort of the major concepts I wanted to at least get across with some lively discussion, especially towards the end. And this time around, since we're small numbers, we're not going to break out into smaller groups. I think we'll pepper this piece, this segment with interactive conversation to the slides and to the questions. So I hope that works well for you. All right, next slide, Jim. So this time we're going to focus a little more on the power of God, that piece that God is doing, quote, this to show power, but towards a specific end. And in that, what's connected is that, it's God's invisible in this right now. The why. God's behind it, but he's invisible. And I won't use the pronoun he, but God's invisible into this. And I think it's elucidated in one of his pieces, one of his writings on page 20, if you have the text. It's called Peeking into Mystery. Peeking into mystery. And I think this underscores the invisibility. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like to read it out loud, as I think it captures this concept. Creator God, you have entrusted to us knowledge of good and evil. You have permitted us knowledge of the world in which we live, and that knowledge has yielded immense gains for us, gains of control, of productivity, of explanation, of connections, of causes and effects. Only rarely, like now, do we collide with your hiddenness that summons us and embarrasses us. We peek into your awesome hidden presence, and we find your sutitudes quite disrupted. Thus, we pause at the edge of your holiness, finding that your unfathomable presence is an odd mix of mercy and judgment, of generosity and accountability, of forgiveness and starchy realism. We dwell at the mystery, at the edge of your mystery for an instant, not longer, And then we return to our proper work of knowledge, research, explanation, and management. By that instant, however, we are changed, sobered, summoned, emancipated, filled with wonder before your holiness. It is for that holiness that outflanks us that we give you thanks. Amen. Wow, a lot to think about. If we could snap back into full view, Jim, I just want to
Backwards.
talk a little bit about that. Any reactions to, I mean, meaning so we could see everyone's faces, that's what it meant.
All right.
Any reactions into that writing? What?
Could you read that last sentence?
Sure, the last sentence. How about I'll read the last. By that instant, however, we are changed, sobered, summoned, emancipated, filled with wonder before your holiness. It is for that holiness that outflanks us that we give you thanks. A lot to
What does he
capture.
mean by outflanks us?
Okay. What do you think?
Well, in football, you outflank somebody by going around and avoiding them, or I mean, not being caught by them. So in a way, maybe God is not caught by our preconceptions or our limitations.
What else stood out to you from this writing? Anything? A lot to capture.
It can be, it can give you a little bit of dread. Brueggemann's not, he's pointing out the things we have been given, our knowledge and our analytical ability and our knowledge of good and evil, but that only gets us so far. And we are stuck. We are we're hanging off an edge, like he said, off a precipice.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly challenges our sense of control of our world.
Very much so. Yeah. So that sense is we see this wonder, right? The glory of God, and then we want to hide, retreat back to this need of we're good in our knowledge and our explanations, and that's where we're more comfortable. And so that's the piece of looking at this part of his model of that God is working and in doing and showing his power towards a specific end, but it may be hidden right now. So, okay, thank you for your thoughts on that. So if we can move to the next slide, Jim, and welcome, Daryl. I see your picture. So, welcome. So this is just a visual, just to reinforce this God of unknowing and inscrutability. Next, please. So we talk about pandemics, particularly in this class, or calamity, but I just wanted to stretch that out a little bit more, and perhaps we could bring in the whole idea of just natural disasters and what is our thinking of the power of God when we look at things like, wow, hurricanes and tornadoes and incredible fires and volcano eruptions and you name it, earthquakes, severe weather patterns. So where is God in all of this? So I wanted to maybe just broaden it more just for a moment past the pandemic piece to think that perhaps where is God in all of this? Next slide. So I'd like to take a moment here with the group and read, this is taken exactly from the text from, again, Professor Brueggemann, and this is his statement. It is possible to trust that the God of the gospel is in, with, and under a crisis without imagining that God is the cause of it. I'll read that again. It is possible to trust that God of the gospel is in, with, and under a crisis without imagining that God is the cause of it. And it's interesting, Jim, that within your prayer, you alluded to this a little bit. We had no idea that we were going to sync up, or I didn't know that was your prayer today. But I want to just ask the group, do you agree with this statement? And if yes, no, and perhaps share a little bit of your thinking about this. So maybe we can come back to the group basis.
I think a crucial word in that passage is trust. Because if you think of the many times in the Bible, God knows every hair on your head. He knows, or sorry for the pronoun, but God knows the beginning, middle, and end of everything. Between the word trust and the word cause, there's a tension there. Is cause, when you say cause, is God the agent of it, or is God the instigator of damage? Because we profess that God knows everything he knows every hair on our head before we're born. So this is a to say that, so that's a knowledge, say, from Scripture, but to trust God is a step beyond that knowledge. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. I want to hear other people. Does this make, quote, sense to you? Is this something that you can ascribe to? And I see Paul Driver. Hello, Paul.
I don't know if you can hear me.
We can, yes.
I don't know if you can hear me, but I think God in every action. However, humans have free will. So humans are the cause of many difficulties in our world. It's not that God is the cause of it. God is involved in every interaction, but God is not the cause of every interaction.
Okay. Thank you for that. Someone else, does anyone have a different point of view? So either you're thinking, or perhaps this may be a consensus statement.
I think, well, let me, something just occurred to me. If we accept this as a true premise, then should we also accept that it applies for if you substitute crisis for good fortune or something good?
So the opposite. So that
Yeah.
is under and within and sort of under the cause of good fortune.
I mean, it seems to me that you've got to apply it to everything.
Yeah. So it's both and, right? It's not an either.
Well, it's easy enough to like give God a pass on the bad stuff. But the question is, if we give God a pass on the bad stuff, do we accept that God is also not the cause of the good stuff that we get?
Yeah, no, that is an excellent point. In my belief, yes, God is around, under, and supporting all of it, and it's the fullness of life. The whole Zorba the Greek, the whole catastrophe, right? The whole panorama of life, and on all of its feelings. So, thank you. Others?
I don't know, it sort of dances on the edge of the notion of God as sort of, what is it, the watchmaker? He created all of this and now is simply back there observing, witnessing, perhaps with this under us, but not intervening. And I don't know. I don't know what to do with that.
Right.
It's in Brueggemann's prayer or poem that you read. There's a center thing that describes God's unfathomable presence as an odd mix of mercy and judgment, generosity and accountability, forgiveness and starchy realism. And I think it's that struggle of understanding what God is, and if we can, what God is really about and how he works in all this.
Right. So there's no pigeonholing. It's incredibly complex. So yes, we're struggling with this, and I think that makes a lot of sense to us. So next slide, please. So if
Last week,
go ahead. Oh, is someone saying something? Then maybe the call of the train stop. Oh, that's cool. So if
last week I told you how angry I was
sure.
about the pandemic, and whether God caused the pandemic through whatever chemistry is involved in it, the pandemic is clearly too much for humans to handle well. And I would clarify that my anger is more at the human reactions, mainly irresponsible actions, actions taken that don't address the needs of others.
Okay. Yes, thank you for that, because I think that's going to be a nice transition as we're moving forward in this discussion. I think you're getting at the point of what is this pandemic exposing, perhaps, the human reaction. I'm going to go to the next slide. This is just sort of a visual to cue up this thinking. So given the anger that you feel, which is a very common, real, raw emotion to all of this, if we're thinking that God is with us and under this, but maybe not causing perhaps these things, where is God when issues like structural racism and sort of anti-Asian racism and white supremacy and all of those things, extreme consumerism, where do you think God is at work in you can pick out one or just in general? Where do you think God is at work here?
Your quote mentioned the gospel, and that implies God in human flesh, in Jesus. God in Jesus, God in all of us. God where those who are suffering. That's one response.
Okay, yes.
With George Floyd is with people who are being violated.
Yes, so God is in the suffering. Yes, in the suffering person. Okay. Others, where's God in this?
I think God is present. I'm saying the same thing basically, but if you believe in God's presence everywhere, then there are times, maybe most of the time, that people aren't tuned into that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's when things get haywire. It's the moments that people are tuned into that maybe good things happen,
Okay.
such as, the shopping scene, for example. It's kind of crazy, and most people probably are not thinking about God when they're probably worshiping false idols, as people would say. But maybe there's a moment where there's one big screen TV left between two people, and maybe one does something nice for the other,
Mm-hmm.
so that they
Okay.
don't fight about it. So that's where that one person or two people or however many people kind of tune in.
Sure.
It's that radio frequency out there that most of the time you don't even pay attention to. But, when you tune it in, that's when good things happen.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was Allison, where is God intervening in this, right? And I think that was the question here. And it's easy to lose sight because we are met with these intense visuals, at least on the media. And what you're not seeing, I think, are the helpers. Like,
Right.
Right.
what Mr. Rogers would say,
Yeah.
look for the helpers, but we're not
Right.
always seeing that. And so at least for me, it's sometimes easy to get lost in the, oh my goodness, this is just awful all the time. And everyone's bad, right? It's easy to make that global judgment.
Yeah. I think Mr. Rogers could just as well have said, look for the presence of God.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Yes.
I have a word that kind of brings God to these situations, and it's my reaction and what I do, what I can do
Mm-hmm.
in God's presence in these situations. Feed the hungry, put a sign in my yard, do something representing how I feel, have a reaction that shows God's presence.
Okay. So on an individual level, it's
Right.
your faith, your call, so to witness the goodness.
Because I can't see God in, George Floyd, that instance. I can see God in a response.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you.
I just,
Okay. Anyone else? Before we move on.
If the people are not monoliths, and if you think of the motivation of the people in Black Friday there, possibly God is in the yearning they have to find something. They're buying all this junk to fill something in their life. They're just not sure what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That yearning, that striving for something larger might be a call from God to look deeper into their lives somehow. I'm not trying to excuse terrible consumerism, but if these people are children of God, there's a calling in them, pulling them towards something better. And we see them at a bad situation here, and it might not be the permanent situation for them.
Yeah, I like that. It may not be permanent. It's that that grasping for something to fill the void, and at some point they may find that this is not it, right?
And I do not want to excuse any of the other pictures in there, especially the assault on the Capitol. But in that way too, there are people who are striving for something. Then it gets really complicated. There are 7,000 people there. I don't know what each individual person's there, but there is God in each and every one of them, and they're yearning for something.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, yes. Okay. All right.
Hard to get your mind around.
It is.
Sympathy.
For
Sympathy and for them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's a lot to struggle with here. Next slide, please. So let's go back to the scripture because it's the biblical reflection. Who would like is there someone who would like to read this passage from Isaiah?
I'll read it.
Thank you, Ira.
For a long time, I have kept silent. I have been quiet and held myself back. But now, like a woman in childbirth, I cry out, I gasp and pant. I will lay waste the mountains and hills and dry up all their vegetation. I will turn rivers into islands and dry up the pools. I will lead blind Israel down a new path, guiding them along an unfamiliar way. I will brighten the darkness before them and smooth out the road ahead of them. Yes, I will indeed do these things. I will not forsake them.
Thank you. So how, if, is this a passage like this helpful for us in framing what's happening? What message do you hear from this piece, this text?
Well, blind Israel stands out to me. That goes back to our limitations on what we can know about anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it does imply an active God who's intervening even when we don't understand exactly what that intervention is or where it may lead us. But so there, that takes us back to the trust that,
Yeah. So your initial reaction of, is God intervening in this pandemic? So does this create any insight to you, given your original thought? Does this, I won't say make any difference, neutral, or it's just interesting to read?
I really
It
like
starts
the
with,
line.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I really like the line, I will lead blind Israel down a new path, guiding them along an unfamiliar way. Someone the other day said, you know, we were born to struggle so that we would learn to be in another way, something like that. I
Mm-hmm.
love that line.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to the person who said, we don't seem to know what to do about these things. We're kind of messing up. This was a Paul that said that.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and we are, in my thing, we are being led down a new path, but it's unfamiliar. But there's also a sense of hope. I will brighten the darkness and smooth that road ahead of them. The sense of not feeling abandoned. I will not forsake them. Anyone else have a reaction to this as it relates to our discussion?
Why does it start, the second line, the second paragraph is bad stuff. Then it turns into good stuff, but it doesn't like make a distinction between the two.
Hmm.
He says, or Isaiah says, or God says, I will, lay waste the mountains, dry up the vegetation, and then kind of go in it. So I guess, to me, it's almost like it's all one and it's all part of the same stuff. It's not.
Yeah, it seems like this is what God does.
Yeah.
I will.
Uh-huh.
Right. It's just, and then there's no. Yeah. I'll do all this stuff and this is bad and he doesn't say bad and good, but
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
and I will not forsake them. So I will lay waste the mountains and dry up their vegetation, turn rivers into islands, and then concluding, I will not forsake them. Does that mean that God is not forsaking us when God turns rivers into islands and dries up the pools? I think so.
Sure feels that way, doesn't it? Sure feels
Well,
that.
it says it, and I guess it can feel in the moment like God has forsaken us when the second paragraph takes place.
Mm-hmm.
But what this is saying is, no, God is not, by doing that, God is showing that they're not forsaking us.
So it's God's version of tough love.
I think that's a little too active. I mean, it reminds me of like Jesus on the cross, God, why have you forsaken me? And God was like, hey, don't be so quick to assume that I've forsaken you here.
It's like we want a quick, in our time frame, answer or explanation. I want to know now. Why is this happening now?
Well, it's framed by the act of childbirth, which is a process and a struggle to be born, to give birth.
Well, Carol, you must have read my slides, so hang in there.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, thank you. So next slides, please. So keep it. So we'll get to it. But the idea here, and we're kind of dancing around that perhaps some of these calamities, disasters, perhaps leads to good ends. The childbirth, and we'll talk about it, may not be considered a disaster, but it takes work and it takes time, and it's not a quick fix. There's 9 months that of gestation, and maybe we're in this gestational phase of what's happening, where God's paving a new road. Next, please. So here, this was the slide. And so that's interesting that you brought this up. In Professor Brueggemann's text, he speaks of this concept of the matrix of groan. Yeah, I love that. The matrix of groan. I just love that phrase. And it's this birthing of something new, of a new creation. And if any of you have birthed children, that certainly sort of, I have once. And yes, there's a lot of groaning. There's a lot of change that happens within your body that seems hidden and invisible, happening on cellular levels that we can't see. A new creation, a new being come into the world. And then the actual process of birthing is absolutely amazing and absolutely painful. There's lots of groaning along with it. So the fact that he uses this imagery of the matrix of groan, I put the baby birthing. I think there's something to it because we can relate to it. Next, please. So here's another verse that perhaps relates. Carol, would you mind reading that verse?
Forget the former things. Do not dwell in the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland.
So my hope in crafting these slides and piecing these together is that we're moving into there's this pain and there's this invisibility and anger and all that's going on, this birthing that's happening. But what could God be birthing within us? And so that's where I want to spend some more time in discussion. Next slide, please. And that it does take faith to believe this, to feel it, to own it, to live it. So next.
This guy saying, do you not see it? Like, I don't see it.
Yeah.
I'm working on it, but
Yeah.
I'll take your word for it. I can't see springs in the deserts at this point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so he also talks about moving towards the edge of a new normal. So what are we moving towards? Any thoughts? I just wrote down gender and racial equality, perhaps better stewards of, of our natural resources, right? But what are others thinking that perhaps all of this could be leading to a new path? Just
Well,
A
I'd
lot of it
say
is hope. Oh, go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
development of the virus, or the vaccine, I mean, was the use of worldwide knowledge and industrial capability to quickly address something like this. So that's one physical thing that we're that might be a new normal, that barriers between countries and between institutions are broken down so that things can be solved quickly.
yeah, the collaboration between two major pharmaceutical companies coming together, which is unheard of, right? It's such a competitive business to create a vaccine, which is a small miracle.
Yeah, that's a whole story that I don't even know about. How did the funding come through? How did they agree? How did they find the factory space and effort to do it? There's a whole book in that we don't know yet.
Mhm. Others. Ira, you were going to say something, I think.
Yeah, I think it kind of, to me, it speaks to hope. And just have to have hope that things will turn around, and if not for the better indefinitely, at least in some ways for the better. I mean, I hate to say this because I don't subscribe to this, but when I see, for example, the picture of Kamala Harris, I think a lot of us will look at that and say, yeah, that's progress. That's great. A lot of people, though, fear that or think that that's a sign of something bad, or that the two women, unfortunately, they might think, what's that about? Or they might see Black Lives Matter and get afraid, like our great senator from Wisconsin the other day, who said that he didn't fear the
Mm.
Yeah.
the protesters on the Capitol, but if it had been Black Lives Matter protesters, he would have been afraid.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know why I'm saying that exactly, but I guess it's just we all have our own. We can't. I think partly it's that we shouldn't assume that what we think of as hopeful is hopeful for everyone. But at the same time, I think we have to have a sense that it'll all be good. And and when you close your mind to things like, Kamala Harris is a possible next president of the United States, for example, and you think that that's bad, then you're kind of, I don't know. Well, I don't know. I was going to say you're not being godlike, but that might not be fair either. Sometimes it's just discerning what is truly good or not, and when do you see when do you see trouble on the horizon, and when do you see, no, it's not trouble on the horizon, it's just
Mm-hmm.
different.
Yeah. No, it begs a lot of questions and keeping in mind different, certainly, points of view. Anyone else have some thought on this?
Yes, I think I think of immigration, and I think of countries, third world countries. Maybe we can work on this a little bit more. Maybe we can get some new normal in terms of immigration policies and reaching out to the third world countries to help this balance. This is, they have a lot of strife in those countries, and let's work toward changing that.
So instead of, sort of me first. We're looking more globally again.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
I think for kids, when they grow up, they are not going to feel secure in the kind of things that older people felt security in, such as, getting an education, having a job. I guess I view them as always, that they will always be thinking that how quickly everything can disappear,
Mm,
which is not a part of the thinking of people our age,
mhm.
unless you've lost everything before. Um,
It'll be fascinating to
So-
see. I have a little great nephew who was born within the pandemic. It'll be fascinating to see what his life is like growing up with people with masks, and I mean all of this. You just think about how different to be born in this time. Yeah.
yeah, I would think they would always have a sense of danger, perhaps. Um, when I was growing, well, very young, like 4 or 5, the politics of the world was such that everybody expected a nuclear war.
Mhm.
And let's see, I think I was in kindergarten when Kennedy got shot. And even though I lived half a mile from school, we were not allowed to leave until 10 p.m. because everyone thought that the Russian missiles were coming. So when you grow up
Mm.
like that, you always feel there's danger everywhere.
Mm.
And it's something I've discussed with my classmates over the years, and we all have that sense.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, think about the kids who've gone through school shootings
Mm.
that learn to, how to take cover and all the procedures that go along with that. Yeah. So, yeah, that could be a new normal that is hard to think about.
Mhm.
Not the the positives that in general. Next slide, please. So I want to bring it now to our world, our church. Given our discussion today, I want to spend just a few moments thinking, what could God be birthing now in our church at Fourth Pres? Given the state of the pandemic and our learnings. And Jim, is it possible to take down the slide for a minute so we can all see our faces? There we go. Let's see you all at once and each other if you hit gallery view. So what could God be birthing in our church at Fourth Pres right now, just given our current discussion?
This doesn't answer directly your question, but the metaphor that comes to mind is what's being revealed is this, it's like an X-ray to see the inner workings, the skeletal support system of our nation and world, perhaps, to see both its strengths and its limitations in some new ways.
Okay.
That we wouldn't have without going through this terrible time, which doesn't say God made it happen, but it's something to be noticed and learned from, something like that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think, at least for me, you get caught up in the automatic, like being a robot. You get up, you run to work. You don't have as much time to reflect, to sit back. I don't know about you, but I would have a to-do list that would keep me busy from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. with a no breather in between. And now I don't want to do that anymore. And to do one or two things takes a lot of effort, and I spend more time reflecting. So we're seeing, at least for me, you're right, the skeletons that are exposed. Other people.
well, it kind of in that vein, I've read a few things. If you think of this as an apocalyptic time,
Hmm.
from the sense of Revelation or pulling away the screens. And that works on both a personal level. So understanding sort of the autopilot of your life and how that should change, but then how we bring that forward to the bigger world.
Mm-hmm.
From your previous, I think it feels like we're on that edge. We've sort of seen how wrong the path is,
Mm-hmm.
but the forward is less obvious, or how we get to the forward.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Anyone else have some thoughts, maybe as it relates to Fourth Pres?
I think the need for community um, probably has been shown has been lacking, because as I attend classes and coffee hour, people talk to each other differently.
Hmm. Tell me.
I think. What am I trying to say? I guess I feel that um, the fact that we need community among church members is enhanced because it's been taken away.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking the community may change somewhat in the future when we're able to gather again.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not quite sure what that will look like. Not sure that anybody knows yet. But I think the fact that we cannot actually meet in person is going to change that.
Yeah. Reminds me of the song, "You don't know what you got till it's gone," right?
Thank God, yeah.
I think it's notable. I think it's notable that the um, George Floyd and Breonna and the Black Lives Matter protests and everything, that all happened during lockdown. And we've all been in this big timeout from before and since. I just wonder if, I mean, is it just me, or is it just gonna, and I don't know if we'll just get used to it after a while, but just as it was weird, very strange to be working from home every single day in the beginning of the lockdown. I think it's going to be really weird and really strange that first day they open up services.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are we going to get dressed up? Are we gonna be wearing our pajama bottoms like we used to do? And are we gonna talk to each other? What are we gonna do about the race relations that we've been learning about, but we haven't been able to quite put into practice because we haven't been together.
Yeah.
It's just, when you think about it, it's just, there's a lot, when you talk about community, the whole sense of community has changed. Like, what does community mean? Does it mean getting all dolled up and going to church and being on your best behavior, or is it connecting with people? And if it's connecting with people, what's that about? And is the small talk a part of connecting with people? And
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know. And I don't know if anyone knows, but it's just going to be an interesting transition, to say the least.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if anything changes from before. And if it needs to change, I don't know. Some of it was fine. A lot of it was fine.
It, I think a big difference is we go back to whatever normal may be or maybe becoming, is that we probably will be able to think more about it, plan it more, or at least do it in a more intentional way. Whereas when things shut down, it was like, bam, shut. In some ways, that was easier. Walking our way back to the future is harder.
It's that matrix of groan for sure. Yes. No,
An observation about community.
Sure.
I am in a small group. I started in, let's say September, we were looking at a book. Then we did another one, the same group together. And now that same group is staying together to be led by individuals in the group. And I think that really speaks to the notion of smaller, intimate groups within this large church, which, by the way, I'm not even a member of. So, this small group nature is really an interesting concept, and one that Fourth Church and our group has picked up on.
Do you think you could, Chris, do you think you could maintain that group by, do you think there's a desire to get the group in person? Or is this Zoom
absolutely.
thing?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I kind of look at Zoom and think, I don't know. It's like, this is fine to me. I don't need to get dressed up, go, get up early, go to church, rush to church, blah, 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 and talk about this stuff. I mean, this is just fine. And I can maybe do 2 or 3 of this stuff a day if I wanted to.
Sure.
Whereas before, with all the commuting and stuff, or like our, the church committees, again, as much as it's nice to see people in person, and I guess I'll get used to that, but there's a lot of me that just thinks, this is just fine. Maybe I'm just used to it.
Yeah.
Interesting thinking. Thank you for that, because I'm going to be a first time on session. And yesterday we spent all day in an anti-racism class, training class, but this will help. I'm sure I'll be part of the discussion of how that opening will look like or what will take place. So this is good insights to have. So we can't answer it at the moment. All right, I'm going to move us just a couple more slides and we're going to start wrapping up. Okay, so Jim, if you could move us. All right. So I think I'd like to leave the group with some thoughts to ponder during this week is, where is the edge of your new normal? Not just the collective. And we'll spend time on perhaps more personally during our next discussion is, where is that edge? Where are you teetering? Where could you be birthing something new in yourself, in the way you interact in the world, perhaps differently? And Ira, you might be alluding to that. You're okay with maybe a hybrid, perhaps, of small groups that are per Zoom, and then other opportunity to do maybe a couple things in person, but it may not be cookie cutter all the same. So spend time really thinking about, where is the edge of your new normal? Next slide. And I want to leave us with this thought, because I think this was carried through the scriptures and in our discussion today. God will see us through this. It's written, God will see us through it. He's doing a new thing, but we need to do the work. We will be the ones who need to do the work. God's not going to do it for us. And that takes time and birthing and pain and anger and elation and new learnings and each other. Absolutely each other, community. So I want to thank everyone for your thoughts, your ideas coming to this class. I so appreciate it. And I look forward to next week.
Thank you, Janine. I know this is really tough material. I have not read the book, but I heard that it's very dense.
Yes.
So thank you for making some sense of this stuff, and the slides are very helpful.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
You too.
I kept thinking, yeah, I've got a PhD, but so what? That makes no difference in this book.
Ah,
You read the book, so I don't have to, right?
A few times, and I thought, my goodness. Anyway, all that said, thank you. I look forward to next week, and have a good one.